Hello, Wroclaw. Did I pronounce that right? Cool. Hey, sorry, Mike. I should have probably told you this. I changed the topic of my talk. Uh, yeah, last night at the speakers' dinner, we had this great conversation about philosophy and art and humanities, and I realized that the best way of really using my time here today is not to talk about React Native, because there's enough of that. Is we need to understand art, I think. It's very important, don't you think? This drawing was drawn by Leonardo da Vinci in the early 1500s, in the Renaissance period. It's an anatomical study of a fetus in a womb. And Leonardo was an artist, but he was also a man of science. And it shows the correct anatomical structure of a womb. Here it's presented in a nutshell, which is not anatomically correct. Today, he would have gone to textbooks to understand the anatomy, but in his day, those books hadn't yet been written. So in order to be able to draw this, he studied actual human biology from first principles, which basically means looking at dead people. Around the same time, Michelangelo painted creation of Adam in the ceiling of Sistine Chapel. It shows Adam touching fingers with God, and it reminds me of Leonardo's sketch in the sense that instead of baby, in a nutshell, the metaphor for God and heavens are represented within the shape of the human brain. What I think interesting about this is that in Michelangelo's day, there wasn't commercial paints available. He painted in a technique called secco fresco, where the pigment was basically mixed with egg yolk to create a consistency to stick to the ceiling when he was painting. 100 years later, Rembrandt painted the picture of Danae. Much like Adam in the previous picture, it's a study of human body painted as part of this mythological story. But what's really magnificent about Rembrandt's work is the way he captures the effect of light. It's a practice that he honed his entire career studying it, and it's probably most distinctive quality of his work. Jumping again 300 years forward, this goes on, by the way. The Large Bathers by Paul Cézanne. It's often considered one of the finest pieces of modernist art. But notice how the presentational realism of the Renaissance has really given away for more abstract impressionist style. In some ways, it's even more expressive because of it. It doesn't aim to document the world in the same way. Instead, it's a composition that evokes something in the viewer. Just look at it. It's beautiful. And finally, this is a picture of Morgan Freeman. It was painted by a guy called Kyle, and he painted it on an iPad. And it's an example of photorealistic art. It's very impressive because the level of detail in which it reproduces the real world, it takes a lot of mastery to get to this level. Not sure if there's a lot of art behind it, but anyway. So now you might be thinking, wow, I definitely did not sign up for this. Is the bar open yet? But hear me out. Let me explain my point. My name is Jani. I'm not an artist. Instead, I build software at formidable labs, like Mike told you. And over the years, I worked with different UI platforms. But like many of us here, I think I've worked mostly with the web. And I'm guessing probably true for most of you here. But then a couple of years ago, I started to work mainly on mobile, specifically on React Native. And the tagline that we all very well know, maybe you should all say it together, learn once, right? Everywhere. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the support. Anyway, as an idea, I feel like this is roughly equivalent to one of these artists taking their brushes and then recreating, their work in another medium, in the style of another artist. And once you become proficient with your brushstroke, it's definitely easier to learn another form of art. Rembrandt could have learned to draw like Kyle, what's-his-face, but he couldn't have just picked up an iPad and started doodling. In fact, even a photograph would have probably freaked him out. So in the same way, what I found that these art forms of web development, mobile development, they're quite different. And while a lot of the skills are transferable, the new medium does require a new set of skills. So let's explain this. Let's break down this analogy a little bit. Web development often feels like this Da Vinci sketch. It's a study of form to create like this lifelike experience to discover some kind of structure. And web dev definitely feels like that too. It definitely feels like painting with egg yolks sometimes. But creating a user experience is an act of invention on the web. There are no universal guidelines. There are still no standard implementations for a lot of the UI stuff that we're doing. Each drop-down, date picker, scroll view, transition, they're unique, and they're something that we come up with as we go. To apply the same standard to mobile development, to build your own tools, invent the experience, what you'll get is probably more like this, Salvador Dali's lobster telephone. Yes, technically it's on a phone, but it doesn't probably make a lot of sense. Now, mobile development, and this is where the thing gets really tenuous, it's much more like photorealistic painting. Mobile users, they expect this finer attention to detail. The platforms just historically have been able to produce this certain set of standard performance and experience, and for better or worse, users have grown to expect that. And they also expect that when they switch between apps, because your app doesn't exist in a silo, that the apps behave according to a certain set of rules. So if this picture of Morgan Freeman was only a little bit off, you'd notice it immediately because you have a picture in your head of how Morgan Freeman or human face in general should look like, and a small deviation puts it squarely in the uncanny valley of great but a little bit creepy. Now, this is because mobile platforms, the tools that have been handed to us by the gods in the sky, the great tool maker, the Google or Apple, and they created these guidelines that serve as standards for what user experiences should feel like and behave like. I hope everybody knows these already, but Google has this thing called material design, and Apple has this thing called human interface guidelines. They're freely available on the internet. We're not going to go through the details here. But there's a lot in there. And these things, they go beyond just the official guidelines. Even for things that aren't explicitly specified, they've become standardized by de facto canonical apps. Take, for example, the pull to refresh functionality. It was invented by developers in a third-party company called Tweety that was then bought by Twitter. And today, if a user sees a list, they will drag it down and pull to refresh it. And if you don't provide that functionality, you're just going to frustrate them because they'll have to figure out again, how do I actually refresh this list? Now, those standards, for better or worse, means that it can be painfully obvious when you're not following them. Like, what if Rembrandt, instead of devoting his life studying light, what if he would have just said, oh, fuck it, I'll just put this lens flare here? That would look a bit off, right? And that's where I feel like following the mentality of learn once, write everywhere kind of gets us if you follow it to a T. Yes, you are learning the React paradigm just once, but I feel often we as developers, we're so hungry for easy answers that we misrepresent this statement. It's not full advertisement, we just want to believe this. I know how to make web apps in React, therefore I know how to make mobile apps with React Native. And it's not React Native's fault, it's just that we want to believe in this fiction so hard because it's convenient for us. So there's a lot to learn, right? How do you do it? These behaviors, these laws, these rules, these conventions, they're fairly well documented in these guidelines and in other stuff out there. So all you have to go ahead and do it. First, draw some circles, and then draw the rest of the fucking owl. I mean, I could spend a lot of time talking about these specifics, but honestly, I could never do as good a job as Alex Kotliarski. He spoke at Chain React in Portland. The talk is called Building Stellar User Experiences with React Native, and it goes through most of these very important topics. I couldn't do a better job with him, so I'll just recommend you to go ahead and watch this talk. Because instead, I want to talk about the one thing that he did not mention. The biggest problem in software development, the biggest problem in art, and the biggest problem, I think, fundamentally in the world. I'm, of course, talking about capitalism. Yes, I mean capitalism. In this perfect world, we could spend our lifetimes getting, the light just right. We could study books, we could study work of masters, we could learn about it. But in practice, most of us, we're building software in this system of production. We have constrained resources, we have limited time, we have limited budgets. And this is, of course, true of all software, but I'm starting to think that React Native community is much more affected and much more susceptible to this problem. And I'll explain you why. At Formidable, in our work as consultants, we talk a lot about a lot of organizations from startups to medium companies, large software companies, big enterprises who don't know anything about software. And all of these companies, they're looking at React Native and they're thinking, I wonder if this is something that can help us create mobile apps quicker and cheaper. Can we reuse our existing web development team to build this mobile app? And the great news is, yes, React Native can create mobile apps quicker and cheaper than the alternative of writing a Swift app and a Java app and then maintaining those. Arguably, it's even possible to create a mobile app quicker and cheaper for just single platform because React, programming model is super productive. But this motivation of efficiency can also be unintentionally harmful, and I'm afraid in the worst case scenario, deadly to the React Native community. Because when the tooling promises operational efficiency, the goal becomes operational efficiency. And more than that, there's a self-selection bias in there. When people go looking for that efficiency, they are just less likely to care about investing into user experience. And so when these companies one quicker and cheaper. There's one superlative, one that they forget, which is, can we use React Native to make software better? Better than what? Better than native mobile apps? I mean, okay, let's see. Maybe using soft functional programming, all the modern techniques, Redux, we can make the software more correct. We can make it less buggy. We can also, it could be easier to reason about, easier to maintain. And we can maybe we can spend more time thinking about product. We can spend more time thinking about features because we're spending less time writing software. So maybe we can even create better products. But the one thing that I think is clear is that React Native can never create a better user interface than native. Don't at me. Because the higher abstraction of React Native will always incur a cost, whether it's startup time or render performance or cross-platform recreations of the UI components that are just slightly off. And the SDKs are optimized for those things, and it's an uphill battle. We can't win that. And most importantly, for mobile platforms, the native SDKs and the the tools there define what perfect is. It doesn't mean that the user experience is perfect, but it's the platonic ideal of perfect that we are working towards. It's basically Morgan Freeman in real life, if he was here. No matter how hard you try, or Kyle tries, you can never paint a Morgan Freeman that is more Morgan Freeman than Morgan Freeman. If you know what I mean. So the goal, I think, and I didn't actually change the topic or the title of my talk, can it be good enough? I think the goal for us should be to find an acceptable compromise that delivers the benefits of React Native as a technology, quicker, cheaper, more correct, easier to maintain, that allows us to focus on the product, but while still delivering user experience that's good enough. Now, in the past, many technologies have tried to solve this problem, right? Of cross-platform UI, of creating efficiency. Cordova, PhoneGap, Xamarin Forms, you name it. And I've tried them all, and every time I failed, and the technology has failed, because whether it's web views or whether it's some leaky UI abstraction layer, it just fails to fulfill the basic requirement. It's either impossible or so pointlessly hard to create great user experiences with these tools that it's not worth to using the tool in the first place. Having built a half a dozen apps in React Native now, I can confidently say that it's actually possible to create an approximation of perfect that is truly good enough. But it doesn't come for free. These tools, they can help us fall to the pit of, into the pit of success, but it depends on you to make it so. And if we want React Native as a technology to succeed, we need to make sure that we are creating the apps that are great. Because otherwise, in the larger kind of like bigger picture, it'll be just dismissed as another phone app, as a thing that you can, quickly create some okay apps. But that's not, like our job as developers is not really to do that. That's a constraint imposed on us by capitalism and competitive markets and, like all these like different hierarchies and structures. Our job is to create great products. And we have to work for it. And I just wanted to highlight the best example of this mentality, I think, is Adam Miscavige, or a guy called Skevy on the internet. You've probably seen him in React Native Expo pull requests. So this is a pull request that's currently open against React Native. And while developing React Navigation, which is one of those JavaScript approximations of a native UI that we kind of really want to get just right, he noticed that transition animations don't quite match the native iOS animations. They're just a little bit off. And the fact that he even noticed, I think, is impressive to me. But I just want to highlight one paragraph of this thing, and I'll just read it all out for you. After doing some research, I ended up disassembling the Quartz core framework, reading the assembly, and determined that Apple's implementation of CA Spring Animation does not use an integrated numerical animation model as we do in Animated Spring, but instead solve for the closed form of the equations that govern damped harmonic oscillation. Right? Dude's a fucking legend. But so then he went and he re-implemented this thing in Animated. And I don't think that any of this falls under the category of learn once, write everywhere. If you were told learn once, write everywhere, you're not thinking of this, right? Reading assembly, harmonic oscillation, I don't even know what those words mean. And surely we, all in our daily jobs, we can't expect it to program at this level. Yeah, sorry, boss, I know that I did estimate the navigation story to be 2 days, but now I'm a week into reading the Quartz core assembly, and it's not looking good, dude. It's not looking good. No, the thing is, there's an obvious difference in the amount of that organizations. BuzzFeed, only 90s kids will get this reference. Yeah, so I mean, there's an obvious difference in the amount that organizations are able to invest in user experience. You don't simply have the same resources in your fingertips as, let's say, Facebook. And that's okay. It's not a fair comparison. But except for $500 billion, what is the difference between you or your company and Facebook? I tried really hard to kind of summarize this nicely, but the one that I came up with, a single word, is maturity. It's the idea of how mature are the practices of your, if you're a single developer, your practices, or your team, or your organization. How well are you as a team able to, within its constraints given to it by this capitalist model of production, able to execute building great software products? And I want to break this down a little bit. The first one I can think of, and this is one that Alex Kotliarsky talks about in his talk in Chain React, is caring. And this immediately resonated to me, but I also think caring is one of those fuzzy feel-good words that are really hard to quantify. So basically what I mean is just giving a shit. Giving a shit about user experience means putting user first and user experience in the forefront. Front-end programming, in my opinion, don't at me, whether a web or mobile shouldn't be about state management. It shouldn't be about MobX versus Redux or sagas versus observables. It's about creating a great human interface for the user, for the end user of the product. Now, different parts of engineering have different goals. Back-end engineering have different goals. But as UI engineers, I believe this should be our first and foremost, directive that we should be following. And to get there, we absolutely do need to sweat the little details. And given under this commercial pressure or this kind of like a culture around you, we need to make sure that that actually happens. And in practice, this often means making sure that things work right in a way that in code reviews, instead of reviewing code, you actually test for UX, right? Like you actually run the code, you test it, you hopefully even show it to a user. In sprint planning, you make sure the time is adequately budgeted for building experiences that are great and not just like some hacky MVP stuff. And in order to be effective, like when you care, in order to be effective, in order to kind of be able to actually like operate, you need to get an understanding of what constitutes a great user experience. And to put this in simple terms, it's basically knowing your shit. So the best way I found to do this, and this is just my personal process or my personal point of view, is to study how other apps solve similar problems. It's not about copying instead of creating original ideas. It's about copying what works because it works. Studying that Rembrandt to understand how the light is painted is the same thing as studying the Twitter app or the Facebook app and understanding how they do certain things. Also, get 2 phones. If you're using iOS, get an Android phone. If you're using Android, get an iOS phone, assuming that you're implementing for both platforms. Because you need this intuitive understanding of how those platforms work. The only way to use those, do that is to use both platforms and feel the frustration and allow yourself to start seeing the patterns. I recently switched from I got a Samsung S8. It's pretty good. I recommend it, except that I have no idea what any of the emojis mean. They're these weird pictures, and it gets really confusing with my girlfriend because she sends me a message and I have no idea what she's trying to. She's like angry or... and finally, read the research. So whether it's reading material design guidelines, whether it's reading original research on the internet, reading academic research, like this really depends on like at what level do you want to operate. But you do need to understand the underpinning philosophy of these and actually reading UX research, so you don't need to invent this stuff yourself. Now, you might ask, isn't that the designer's job? Like we are engineers. We're supposed to be engineering. And well, here's the bad news. Nope. It's actually your job. But it's not as bad as it sounds. It's actually everyone's job. So you can stop sweating it. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's actually even worse. It's that it's your job as somebody who cares, i.e. gives a shit, and somebody who knows your stuff. It's your job to make sure that these values get carried out to the actual work that you build. You need to advocate for these practices. And it turns out that people engineering is a lot harder than software engineering. So that gets to the third point of the maturity, which is creating a culture of shared responsibility and shared set of values. And the really hard thing about this is that you need these values across all the people who participate in the product development process. So, I mean, you know, I'm maybe leaving some things out here. I'm leaving out things like QA. But on a high level, I would say that design, engineering, and management need to understand what digital product development means, and then you need to all be working towards that, you know, in a shared set of ways. So it means that design needs to create an experience that feels great. They need to design an experience to feel great. And more often than not, you will actually find that organizations that go for React Native and they have their web developers kind of like start building mobile apps, they do the exact same thing that their designers. And you know, design isn't just kind of easy thing. You just kind of like drag some boxes in Sketch or whatever. It's actually, you know, like a complex study. And many of the designers aren't really prepared for it. And you know, if you care and you understand this stuff, it's your job to work together with them. But even when they got it, even then when they know what they're doing, they can't do it alone. Engineering fundamentally needs to build it. And this includes all the stuff that the designer left out, which we all know that happens. There isn't a motion study for every animation. There isn't a design for every or any empty state. There isn't design for loading state. And beyond that, you need to make a million little ad hoc UX decisions in your daily job that you as an engineer are solely responsible for doing. And finally, and the most hardest thing, is that management needs to be on board to make sure that there's sufficient investment in terms of budget and schedules that allow us to create these experiences that are good enough. And this is where it gets, you know, hard. Like, how do you convince management of the value of user experience? I don't have an easy answer for you. It depends on your product. It depends on what you're building. But essentially what you can say is that, you know, like the act of building a product, there is something between that MVP and that truly delightful experience that actually makes your user not only like try out your app, but also like retain it and all that. And then, you know, there's a lot of material in that I can tweet out afterwards. But how do we do that? Like, how do we build a mature and sustainable mobile development practice in an organization that is not fundamentally necessarily ready for it, that, you know, is choosing React Native as a technology, or even you as an individual developer are using React Native as a technology because it seems to offer some easy answers, and you know, like within that you need to you need to recalibrate something. So I think this is, you know, the actual only slide in my presentation that has some content. First, you know, set expectations. Things don't come from free. Yes, learn once, write everywhere is true, you know, like within the context that it was initially meant, but it's not true in the way that people want to understand it. And you need to invest in the process of, you know, bringing up yourself as a developer, or bringing up, you know, developers in your organization, the entire organization up to speed. Second, design collaboratively. Like, if your design process looks like somebody making designs and then somebody signing them off, and then it ends up in your desk as a developer, you've already missed this like opportunity, or this, you know, the only real way to create experiences is that the engineers are the only people who can actually fundamentally see where the designs fall short. So bring engineering and design to the same table. Understand UX as a kind of like a holistic thing. And ensure it gets built right. And actually, number 3, validate, you know, this UX with users, because they're the people who the software is actually for, right? Like, even if you follow all the guidelines to a T, that only tells you that you're not doing things wrong, but it doesn't tell you that you're doing things right in a way that makes sense. And then, in order to prepare for, you know, the final and most important point, which I get to next, is build a component library. This is like one of these advantages that React has over native UI development frameworks, and the one that is essentially the canvas onto which your kind of like work can be painted, is that build a component library. Otherwise, you're just building one-off hacks and you're not really like learning, and you don't really have any way of improving existing work. And obviously, we know that we can't deliver perfect things at the first time, and much less so when you're under pressure to deliver. And that's why the final point, and the most important one, which I want to really get into a bit more, is that when your app hits the store, that's not the end of it. That's the beginning of the journey. Like in this, like like there's no, like I am not advocating for a waterfall method where you spend 7 years creating the perfect app and then realizing that the business conditions have changed and your app is no longer useful and also Apple's gone bankrupt and all this stuff. What I'm saying is that you need a way to iterate and improve constantly to make things better. So, do you remember this painting, The Bathers by Cézanne? What makes this a masterpiece? I think there's every art historian, every critic probably has their own reasons. For me, it's this atmosphere that is at the same time it's strange and it's beautiful, and there's this tension and density and contrast in the composition that's just beautiful. It's just breathtaking. But the thing about Cézanne's painters, the Bathers, is that it took a remarkable process of perfecting over time to not being satisfied in the good enough to get him there. Before he painted this, he painted a few other bathers, and he painted a few other bathers, and he painted a few other painters, and still a few more. And I could go on, but basically the point I'm trying to make here is that, yeah, we know that we need to ship shit. That's the job. Shipping, not perfecting. But while we're at it, we shouldn't settle for the good enough, that's good enough. With a process that supports this incremental improvement, we can create better products and ensure that React Native as a technology is not only seen as the good enough solution for creating okay apps quickly, but the best tool for creating great apps, period. And I don't know, I love React Native as a technology. I immensely enjoy working with it. All those benefits that we talked about are real, they're tangible, they make my life better, they fundamentally even make the user's life better because we're able to concentrate more on product and features and all that stuff. We have less buggy software. But in order for this technology to be seen as the kind of like a prime choice for creating prime experiences, it's really up to us to do that. And so I'll leave you with this quote that's often attributed to Michelangelo. I highly doubt that he ever said anything like this, but it's really convenient for me to close this meta-narrative, so let's just make believe for a moment and think that he actually said that. That the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it's too low and we reach it. So what I'm saying is fight the power, resist capitalism, resist the efficiency narrative. Efficiency is good. Efficiency allows us to do more with less. Efficiency makes our companies more competitive. It makes US developers more valuable to your employers. Efficiency is fundamentally good, but focusing on efficiency as the prime directive really is only going to lead into inferior product, because there is really no other way to create efficiency. We can have better tools, but we can't just magically make better things if we don't put in the work. That's not how great masters of art remain the great masters of art. That's not why we're looking at this painting from years ago going like, well, he tried, So that's why we're here today. We're here, because we want to build great apps, great products with React Native, and I hope that this narrative has been at least mildly enjoyable to some of you. I certainly enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this metal rambling, you can get more of the same on Twitter. I'll be in the next couple of days. I'll be publishing a much more serious blog post about this topic. That if you feel that anything here resonated, if you feel anything here was something that you see in your organization that you think that you could improve on, I can hopefully create some materials that you can kind of pass around and maybe start this progress of creating a culture of sustainable mobile development and make React Native great again. So follow me on Twitter, Eväkallio, that's how you pronounce it, just in case you were wondering. Thanks for having me. Thanks.